who are you killing? And how are you being trained to kill them? Right? All right. Now, if we're sophisticated, we might not say those things, but I'll get us to. So what do we say? We say stuff like, I work in a very diverse environment. I have people of color in my family. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, have any of you, this one's popular in Seattle. I live in the most diverse zip code in the United States, 98118, which is, by the way, is Columbia City and is no longer the most diverse zip code in Seattle. But let's start with those first two. How many of you, in a conversation with a white person about racism, have heard some version of, I know people of color, I have people of color in my family? Okay, right. So when a white person tells you that, they're giving you evidence, right? They're giving you their evidence for what? In their mind, what are they giving you their evidence of? That they're not racist, right? So if that is my evidence, how do I define racism? So this is actually really, this has been really useful for me to kind of go under the surface and think, okay, so then, and then if I could figure out how they're defining racism, then I can speak to it, okay? So I would say they're defining racism as conscious dislike. A racist doesn't like people of color, therefore they, I guess, couldn't work 3 cubicles down from somebody. Or if they have a person of color in their family, and clearly they have love for this person, they also couldn't possibly be racist. So they're defining it as conscious dislike, and they're not understanding the power of implicit bias. If we really, have you ever had somebody say, I used to live in New York, and that's why I'm not racist? I've actually heard all of these things, right? So I guess a racist couldn't walk by people of color without losing their shit, basically. And see, I can walk by them, and they're, they're around me. I work here, right? Therefore, I couldn't possibly. Let me ask you, how many of you are in a cisgender? Do you know what I mean when I say cisgender? Okay, if you don't, I'll let your professors help you with that. Not transgender, okay? So you're in an opposite sex relationship. How many of you are in an opposite sex relationship? All right. So for the women in the room, you're with a man, right? You got a man in your life. And the moment he fell in love with you, all his sexism disappeared, right? No? How could he have any sexism? He loves you. There's no gender dynamics in the relationship. Okay, so we see the ludicrousness of that, but we think that racism disappears. There's no racial dynamics between people if they're in an intimate relationship. All right. I used to live in New York. My children are so much open. The problem with this one is we like to romanticize children, but by age 3 or 4, all children know the racial order. This is well researched. They know the racial order. What's the racial order? It's better to be white. They know that. And you got, if you are a parent of color, you got to work very hard to instill worth and pride in them in the face of that relentless message. Okay. We don't like how white our neighborhood is, but we had to move here for the schools. This is actually, I think, another really disingenuous. I think white people do like how white their neighborhoods are. Okay. So we have to go under the surface and figure out what is propping this up if we want to address it. And I think, let's look at these questions.
Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. I hope you're doing fine wherever you are today. Audre Lorde once said that the master's tools does not dismantle the master's house. What did he really mean? He meant that the people who created systems that oppress the minority or that oppress black people, these systems doesn't affect them, and they usually feel like they are racially exempted. And now, Lorde critically uses this phrase importantly, and the idea that the tools of oppression, such as the existing systems and ideologies created by those in power, can be used to bring down genuine change or liberation in the context of race. The master's tools refers to the social, economic, and ideological structures that maintain white supremacy and racial hierarchies. These master's tools, they use them to alienate a black person, their right, their belief, their power. So join me today as we are going to address why white people usually feel like they're racially exempted. And in our today's presentation, our presenter will be D'Angelo. I know most of you know her. She has always stood for black people, and she has always discussed about this, So this generally comes from historical structures where we've seen white people in many society having occupying positions of power and privilege, and this dominance have allowed them to define societal norms, and these are the tools of oppression that white people usually use. And you'll walk in a street today and ask people, do you still believe that racism exists? And then they'll tell you that no, racism doesn't exist. Oh, black people keeps on complaining about racism. But these are power structures that they have kept, the tools of oppression, so if to say. And they are their tools. As I said, the master's tools does not dismantle the master's house. The tools, they have made them to their advantage and to disregard the wants or disregards the equality of other people. So this is going to be a long journey, and it's going to be a learning session for you and I. We are going to learn, and we are going to see how the idea that some white people may feel exempted from racial conditioning or discussing about race, especially when we are living in a colorblind society where you are told that the color doesn't matter, whereas in the darkness or whereas in the discussions, the color really matter. And we are being told that, we are living in a place where meritocracy, it's the lead of the day, when that, you know very well that it's not true. A lot of things have happened to the detrimental of a black person. So join me today in this discussion as we are going to learn from this professor. She's called D'Angelo, and I'm going to be sharing the link of the video, as we are always going to learn and discuss some other important things. Alongside with me, I have a presentation that I'll also share with you that I believe that it is important that we people from the black community need to look into. As you know, this is your presenter, Jindoc Stories, and if you're watching this video for the first time, I'll ask you to join my membership, like the video, subscribe to the channel. It's just an ample request if you think that you'll be learning from the videos. Until then, let's dive right into the video. I hope that you get to learn, get to understand, and get to see how really things really unravel, because it is important for me, it is important for you, and the most important thing, it is always learning. And as continental African, I'm always learning from the lectures that we see, and with that, it opens my eyes. It gives me a perspective as an African to add value to what has been said, or to just look at things in a critical way and add some value, and also ask a question to the structures which have always been put against black people. So I know it's gonna be an educational moment to me and some of you who are still looking forward to understanding the concept of racism. And because in our history classes, we are not being taught about things to do with race, or if you're being taught, we are being taught about them superficially. So join me as we go deeper and understand some concept when it comes to race. This is your presenter, Jindoc Stories, and let's dive right into the video.
Well, this is one of the warmer crowds I've been in front of in a long time, and actually that's going to cause me to relax, and then I'm going to be even more provocative than I usually am. So, but Jody stole my thunder there a little bit. I usually start by pointing your attention to the fact that I'm white, and asking you to actually look at me and think about it for just a minute. And part of what it means to be white is that goes against all my conditioning and all my socialization. because I was taught that I really didn't have a race. I was just the universal human. Race is what they had. And certainly I was taught not to be drawing people's attention to it. So how did I come to be standing in front of groups of people saying, look at me, I'm white, and that has meaning? Well, for me, it started when I got a job as a diversity trainer in the early 90s. I was going to go into the workplace in interracial teams and lead discussions on race and racism. And when I applied for that job, I sincerely thought that my qualifications were that I shopped at PCC, I'm a vegetarian, I went to Evergreen, and I drive a Prius. Okay, so we didn't actually have Priuses in the 90s, but I hope you get my point. I really thought that what this was about was open-mindedness, and that since I was clearly open-minded, I was good to go, and I was qualified, and it was just about getting other people to be open-minded. And I was in for the most profound learning of my entire life on every level. And one is to realize in no way was I qualified to be leading conversations on arguably the most emotionally and politically charged issue since the founding of our country, right? And this is also part of what it means to be white, is that I could get to that point in my life with no really good information and understanding of racism and still see myself as kind of done with my learning and able to lead other people. And I'm sure some of you have seen that dynamic in other white folks. So I spent a good 5 years for a living going into primarily white workplaces and trying to have these conversations. And aside from not really being qualified to do it, I also was unprepared for the depth of hostility, incredible hostility in primarily all white spaces, employed white people who were just really angry about having the conversation at all. And so over the years, I just got better and better at figuring out what it means to be white in a society that professes that it means nothing and yet is profoundly separate and unequal by race, right? And so I wanted to kind of apply that experience to impact people on a larger level, and I went on and got my PhD in whiteness studies. Anybody ever hear of whiteness studies? Does that sound kind of weird? For decades, if not millennium, when white people studied race, we studied them. You know, what's with them, why do they have their problems, etc. And for just as long, people of color looked at us and said, why don't you look at yourselves? You are our problem. And eventually, early 80s, 90s, white academics took up that call and began to put the lens on us, right? And the relationship between us. And that field is called whiteness studies. So when I started, people literally would be pounding their fists on the table and all of this. It doesn't look like that anymore for me. So I want to talk about what new racism looks like, right? How is it that individually most white people feel like they are exempt from any racist conditioning, and yet we have so much racial inequity, right? Prior to the civil rights movement, it was pretty socially acceptable for white people to just come out and say that, yeah, we're superior. That's no longer as acceptable in public spheres, although if you listen to political debates, I'm starting to question that. But it looks like this. So when I just left a position as a professor of education. So I was in a college of education that was 98% white. So 98% white school producing our future teachers. We were located 10 miles from a city that was 57% black and Latino, Springfield, Mass. I would, at the first day of class, have my students take out a piece of paper and write an anonymous essay based on a couple key questions. But before I mention that, I would just say, hi, I'm your professor, and then immediately have them take the paper out. And the reason is I was trying to minimize my influence on them, right, beyond the reality of my body. So I want to take a moment just to say that the way you hear me today will be influenced by the fact that I'm in this body, whether you're aware of it or not. Overall, white people can hear this message from me much better than they can from people of color. And I want to acknowledge that the vast majority of what I have come to understand about how racism works has come from people of color who've been saying what I'm saying for decades, but can't be heard. And so that's what I call the master's tools dilemma. Audre Lorde was a poet, African-American poet, an activist educator, and she had this phrase, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And what she meant is, how do you challenge a system using the tools within the system? So that's a dilemma for me too. As I stand up here as the authority, to a degree, right, on whiteness, I am necessarily reinforcing the centrality of the white voice and the white perspective. And trust me, I go home at night and toss and turn over that dilemma. At the same time, because I can be heard, I'm going to use my voice. And when I feel like giving up, I say, perfect. You'll really be white then. Don't talk about race. That will perfectly protect your position. So I just want to acknowledge that kind of both-and nature of this work, that simultaneously we're reinforcing racism as we seek to challenge it. Okay? And I also want to acknowledge all those incredibly patient and brilliant mentors of color that didn't give up on me. So that I am kind of at the place that I am today. So what do my students' essays look like? I ask them 3 questions. How racially diverse were your neighborhoods and schools? What messages have you gotten across your lifespan about race? And what are some of the ways your race has shaped your life, right? So keep in mind, 98% white classes. I rarely actually ever had a student of color, and we're 10 miles from a city that's 57% black and Latino. And what I'm going to show you is representative of the hundreds of these essays in breadth, in depth. My neighborhood growing up was not racially diverse at all. Every family in my neighborhood was also Caucasian. Throughout my time in school, I've been continually taught that skin does not matter. Right? These are juniors and seniors in college who are going forth to be teachers, and this is the extent of what they can be bothered to write about the most profound and perennial, I think, issue since the founding of our country. Okay? And I'm hoping that you recognize some of this. If you're white, you might recognize it in yourself. If you're a person of color or white and try to talk to other people, you recognize this narrative. It may be a little more bald, but it is the way we do race today, right? And I see a major contradiction in these 3 sentences. Do you guys see that contradiction? How can we be taught that race has no meaning in segregation, right? I think that's the contradiction. And yet, I've never met anyone without an opinion on race and racism. Have you? If you're not sure, bring it up at your next family dinner. And then go beyond the first round of meaningless platitudes. Go to the next round, ask just one more follow-up question and watch what happens. And if you're hesitant to do that because you don't want to ruin the dinner, that should tell you. We got a lot of feelings about this thing that has no meaning, right? And so I'm going to say, maybe my first provocative thing, if you are white, of course you have an opinion on race. And I don't know you. And I don't know your life experience. I don't know who is in your life. I don't know where you've traveled. I don't know what you've read, right? And I can assume that you've gained your opinions from all of those things across your lifespan. And yet, if you have not devoted, sustained, ongoing, continual education and practice on this topic, your opinions are necessarily superficial and uninformed. Just going to say it. How can I say that, not knowing you? Because nothing in dominant society gives us the information we need to have a complex and nuanced understanding of this topic, coupled with our investment in it.
Hey, it's me again with a little bit of interruption, but I need to put this around. We are seeing really Professor D'Angelo making or doing a really great job in disseminating this information about race, and I believe that it is important. People from the Black community or generally people need to know this. And you know, you've been told that the USA is about meritocracy, and there is nothing like, you know, power structures, and everything is fair, and everyone that puts in work will achieve everything that they want. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's not the truth. Basing on what D'Angelo I've talked about, the professor, that I really, really appreciate her for really the good work that she's doing for, the Black community. Now, I'm going to talk about historical power structures as what nullifies the meritocracy that the USA is always telling Black people that if you work hard, you are able to achieve everything you need in your life. Well, that is not true. You know, historically, white people in many societies have occupied positions of power and privilege, and these dominants often allow them to define societal norms. These dominants have allowed them to define societal norms, including what is considered normal or universal, while marginalizing other non-white people. This can create a sense of exemption from racial issues as they are perceived as a problem for others. You understand the fact that the historical structures have been put to alienate a Black person from their rights, and to them, these structures act to their advantage. They put these considerately, knowing that they are going to benefit us at these structures. And when now we are seeing Black people coming out complaining about this, they always have a way of defending themselves and tell them, hold up, what you're saying is not right, because we are not racist and you're not doing any racist thing. And if you're asking, we white people, we are also suffering, you know. Okay, let me put it like this. I know not every white person is benefiting from what we call the white privilege, right? But I know that majority of you are benefiting from what we call the white privilege. For example, a white folk who doesn't have a job, and a Black folk who doesn't have a job, when they go together, maybe in a company or in a farm to look for a job, trust me, with the same meritocracy level that the USA is always saying, these people with both their papers, they are not going to be looked as the same. They are not going to be looked as the same. First, are you white? If you're white, okay. Are you Black? And when you're Black, they're starting looking for some things like what your criminal records, what your history with the police. Have you ever been cashed before? Have you ever been involved in any case? So there's a lot of scrutiny that are put towards Black people, and this shows you how the historical power structures really work, and they work perfectly to the advantage of a Black person. And I understand that these messages are really important when it comes to them folks themselves, because if a Black person comes out and says this, people will say that, oh, that's a lie, you know, you're talking about things that really ended long ago. But when a white person comes and say this, and I say that, oh, she's a snitch, you know, she's a sellout, she's talking bad about us, and she's also enjoying the privileges, you know what I'm saying? So this is something which really happens to people. So the historical power structures that have always been kept to keep Black people in their positions, and in the front line, you'll be always told that, oh, you know, USA is always a place where we look at meritocracy. If you put in the work, you will survive. And amongst other things, including the American dream that people have always been sold, it's always a lie. So white people will feel exempted. Indeed, they'll feel exempted, and they'll enjoy the privileges under the sun when nobody's saying this. But in front daylight, people are going to say, oh, there's nothing like race. We are giving people equal opportunities. They ain't nothing like race. While in reality, that there is something, and there is something big that is being aided out of the sun. And the system is being put to, you know, as usual, to put a Black man down. And I know it is bold enough for me to come and talk about this online. Yeah, I have to say this because it is true. This is something which really happens, and we got to talk about it. And if we see people like Professor D'Angelo coming out and talking about this, I believe that we are heading at the right place. But that's not just enough. It doesn't just end by talking about this in front of people. What are you doing as a white folk? What are you doing in regards to this? What have you done to bring this change in regards to historical power structures that have always been put against black people. So let's continue watching the video as we continue to learn.
Okay. So please hold your opinions lightly and with humility. And just let me stretch you. No matter where you are, I can get you in another place a little bit, okay? Now, people of color, you might be thinking, okay, so she's a white person, focus on white people, which is what I'm doing. How can this be valuable for people of color? Well, I'm going to admit to things that white people rarely, if ever, will name and admit to. So that can help with the crazy making. And you got to navigate this water too, right? You got to deal with us because we are the gatekeepers. You look like a really diverse student body, but I'm confident your faculty and administration isn't, right? We are the gatekeepers. We are who you're going to be in front of when you go to apply for jobs, etc., right? You got to navigate us. So this can be useful to figure out what is going on with those people. And because nothing in society gives anybody good information, you have to kind of know my reality as well as your own. But still, there's so much denial and so much like, no, if you have a problem around this, this is your problem. So this can be really useful for students of color too. All right, so where are we? So we have to start with some shared definitions because these words, prejudice, discrimination, and racism, get used interchangeably in our society. And right there, we're talking at cross ends, right? So prejudice is prejudgment. We get it from everything. It goes well beyond whatever your parents may have taught you or told to you. We get it from every source. We get it across our lifespan, right? Everybody has prejudice about other groups of people to which they don't belong, right? It is not humanly possible not to have prejudice. Human objectivity does not exist. I don't care what your science professors might tell you. There is no human objectivity. You can only make sense of the world through the cultural framework you were conditioned to make sense of it through. Okay? And then discrimination is when we act on our prejudice, and we all do it, right? I was taught that prejudice was hatred, and discrimination was violence and slurs and things like that, which is why I didn't relate to it. But it can be much more subtle than that, but it always manifests because the way you see the world drives the way you respond to the world. And it can be just lack of interest. Comfort with segregation, right? There are many subtle ways, and I would just direct your attention to implicit bias. I'm really grateful that we now understand that most bias is actually not conscious, but there's no way we can miss absorbing these messages because we all kind of navigate the same water. A great example is next time you go into Target or Walmart, go through the toy aisles and tell me if there aren't any collectively sent gender messages out there, right? We're all, you know, I can tell my daughter all kinds of things, but the collective socialization is very, very powerful. We're all getting it. Okay, but then when we get to oppression, we take a group's collective prejudice and we back it by legal authority and institutional control. And that transforms it. And it moves it beyond individual actors and into a system that is embedded in the fabric of a society because this group is built the society. So their prejudice is built into the fabric, right? So it gets embedded in all institutions and also cultural definitions of what's real, what's beautiful, what's valuable, what's normal, whose story is testified to, whose story is not, whose norms are others measured through, and of course will always fall short. Okay, so I want to give you two illustrations. This is like foundational. If we can't grasp the difference between personal prejudice and discrimination and systems of oppression, we're not going to understand how racism is able to flourish today, despite individual people believing that they're against it. Okay, so I want to start with women's suffrage. So when did women get the right to vote in the U.S.? Does anybody know? 1920. Okay, who gave it to us? You can say it. I didn't just say, that's right. All right. Was there any other way, outside of a violent and bloody revolution, which I'm not publicly advocating, was there any other way for women to get the right to vote except for men to give it to us? No. Why not? Because we literally were not seated in the seats of institutional power. We couldn't grant ourselves the right to vote. That's the difference, right? A woman could be prejudiced towards a man, discriminate against a man. I like to say a woman can make a man's life miserable. I've been accused of this at least twice in my life, and it's 2016. But women as a group couldn't oppress men or deny them the right to vote. Okay? And if we don't acknowledge that difference, we just take power off the table. It's not all the same, right? A woman's prejudice against a man at that time is not the same. And keep in mind that it wasn't just the House and the Senate that, you know, denied women the right to vote and that it was up to. Every institution worked together, right? So and every male-dominated institution. So the clergy literally preached from the pulpit that it was God's will that women not vote. And by the way, that's a real hard, God's will is a hard one to challenge, right? Psychiatrists, male-dominated psychiatrists, wrote the studies that said women are inherently irrational. The medical doctors wrote the studies that said if women use their brains, the blood will leave the uterus, go upward, and the babies won't come out as well. This is literally in the books. And ultimately, the military. If women rose up in the street, the military could come and quash that. Do you see that difference? Okay, that's really, really key. So when we're talking about oppression, we're talking about institutional power. And oppression comes in different forms, right? It's always about kind of two groups that are set up in a binary of either or. And then one controls the power. So that one was one from patriarchy. And by the way, today, if men as a group wanted to take away our right to vote, could they? This is another way that oppression works, right? It's so normalized and taken for granted that it's really hard to see. So 80 to 83% House and Senate is male. The presidency has always been 100% male. The economic Fortune 500 CEOs are 98% male. I could go on. They could if they wanted to, which is another example of how oppression works, right? It's deeply historic, embedded, take it for granted. It's not fluid, and it doesn't change over time. Patriarchy didn't end in 1920, and if Hillary gets the presidency, I'm confident patriarchy will not end on that day, okay? All right, so that's from sexism. Let's look at one from racism. So Jackie Robinson, what do we know? In a nutshell, who's Jackie Robinson? So he is the first African-American to play Major League Baseball. Jackie Robinson broke the color line, right? You've all heard that narrative, right? And you always need to listen to the story being told, who tells it and who it serves. So when we put this as Jackie Robinson is our hero, he did it, he broke the color line. It reinforces this idea of an exceptional actor who finally had what it took, right? And I get this image of like a ticker tape, right? And he's running and he finally busts through it. Yeah, right? Now what if the story went like this? Jackie Robinson, first African-American that whites allowed to play baseball. That is actually the story. Jackie Robinson could not play Major League Baseball if we didn't allow it, right? Walk out on the field, police are going to come and take you off, right? We wrote the policies that denied him. We changed the policies that granted him access. That's the difference. And he might have some attitude towards white people. I'm pretty sure he did and does. But his group doesn't hold institutional power.
Hey, I'm really sorry for the interruption, but I gotta talk about this. I'm gonna talk about socialization and privilege, right? So look at the white societies and look at the black societies, or look at the black community, or look at the white community. In a white community, we are not being taught about much about race. There is much about insensitivity when it comes to race, especially in the white communities. And if there is just few of them who follows this. But look, in the black community, on the contrary, what they look into, they teach their children, they wake them up, and they always remind them, remember that you are growing in a system where it is not fair. And for you, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. Whereas in the white community, the children are not being taught about this. And remember, when the children are not being taught about this, when you ask them to go out, they say, no, I don't know anything about race. All I know is that we are rich. I'm able to get this, I'm able to get this, I'm able to get that. While this is not the same from people from the black community, right? Because people from the black community, especially in the United States, are taught when they are kids that, when you go to school, you might experience this. When you go to hospital, you might experience this. This is not the same with children in the white community. They're not being taught that because it is normal for them to be white, right? So, and the system itself protected them from being or getting to know this because of the insensitivity that they are having towards what's happening to the black people. So, and I'm just going to go straight away by talking about this, that many white people grow up in an environment where they are not forced to confront their racial identity, because it is seen as a default, what is called the default, or what is called the norm that's according to them, right? So this can lead to lack of awareness, just like I've said, or understanding of how race and racism affects other factors which are put in place. The concept of white privilege suggests that white people benefit from societal advantages and they may not even recognize, leading to a sense of exemption. Look, this is just what I've said. White communities, the children are not being taught about, you have some advantages that they have. And I think you are not hearing this for the first time. When a white parent is telling their white kid that, thank God that we are white. Thank God that you're not black. You understand? This is because they don't want to tell the kid the socialization and the privilege that the kid has because who they are. Rather, they'll just allude to them that, thank God that you're white. Thank God that you're born in a white family. And they don't tell them that they understand the struggles that black people face. Just because they're black, the inequalities, that's why we have people who usually say that the critical race theory is a social movement according to them, but it's not just a justice equipment. So when a child is brought in a system where they don't know what's happening around them, they're just saying, oh, that's a black person, I'm a white person, but they don't even recognize the privileges that they're going through. Remember, a child is born a blank slate, and everything which surrounds them is who really makes them, what they consume. So if the parents don't tell the kids things to do with race, the children becomes insensitive, or they don't even recognize things which are happening around them. And when they don't recognize things which are really happening around them, they might not know how to handle things to do with privilege, things to do with racism. So this is also a call for white people who are watching this video. You can always teach your kids about how to be sensitive towards other people, knowing that the system has always been on your favor and not on the favor of people from the black community. And I believe that these are some of the discussions that we need to have as people from the black community and people from the white community, because you also need to know this, because you're not being left out in this. And they say that keeping quiet in a situation of an injustice, that's always a complacent injustice. You are yourself doing an injustice by not teaching these kids to be sensitive towards black people. And that's why you are seeing a lot of hate issues coming from white folks towards black people, because these people are not taught how to be sensitive towards black people. That's where the narrative of socialization and privilege generally comes from. So I want us to continue watching the video as we continue learning from D'Angelo, a very good professor. Hope that you really get to learn from her. So let's continue watching the video.
Okay. All right. So this came out, apparently August 26th was the anniversary of suffrage. I guess it was August 26th in 1920. And you know how Facebook will put out these like happy 4th of July, happy this, happy that. They sent this out, and then somebody did this. And it came out a little bit when I asked you who gave us the right to vote. So which women got the right to vote in 1920, right? And that's also how oppression works. The dominant group's experience stands in as everyone's experience, right? There's some universal woman's experience, which I would say, no, there is not, right? So while we were oppressed as women, we were elevated as white women. We do this on the 4th of July. We take all this for granted. What are we celebrating on the 4th of July? Freedom. What's the date attached to the 4th of July? 1776. Yeah, what was going on then? Right? But this is, you know, the whole country is just celebrating, right? Again, always whose story, right? Okay, so racism is a form of oppression. It is a system operating on multiple levels, and it works to ensure an unequal distribution between of everything, between white people as a group and people of color as a group, with whites the beneficiaries of that system. Okay? It has nothing to do, well, it's connected to, but it is not dependent on individual actors. It is going to reproduce itself because the system is set up to do that. So I'm going to show that to you. Marilyn Fry is a scholar that has a metaphor of a bird cage, that oppression is like a bird cage. If you walk right up to that cage and put your face right against that, you're going to get an unobstructed view of the bird, right? Because you've got a very micro or myopic view, like putting your eye in a hole in a fence, right? And you're going to say, what's the problem? The little door's open. Why doesn't the bird just fly away? Why don't they just do X, Y, and Z, and then they won't have their problems, right? But if you step back, you begin to see these bars, and then these bars, and then these bars. When you take a macro view, you begin to see this interlocking network that, while it won't make it impossible for that bird to fly away, will make it very unlikely, and we can predict that it won't, that it certainly will have many, many more barriers. So what are some of those? Our institutions, our ideology, isolation, rewards for conformity, our culture, internalized oppression, microaggressions, the constant threat of violence, our history, the burden of representation, invisibility, and unacknowledged historical trauma. Those are just a few. And anyone who's one of the few people of color in an organization understands the burden of representation, isolation, the pressure. If you keep white folks comfortable around race, you'll get further. All of this weight that I do not hold, carry, or have to navigate. Okay? So I hope you see what I'm doing here. I'm trying to challenge this dominant idea that oppression is just, or racism is just whether or not I tell racist jokes and I don't tell them, so therefore. Right? Okay. Well, this is my metaphor. Because as I listen to white folks day in and day out respond in conversations about race, I got this image of a pier or a dock, because for me that signifies how superficial and surface these narratives are. So let's see if you recognize any of these. I was taught to treat everyone the same. Anybody ever hear that one? Okay. No, you weren't. I'm going to say it again. No, you weren't. You may have been told that. You cannot teach human beings to treat everyone the same. We don't treat everyone the same. And we certainly do not want to in this particular society, because we need to understand what does that person need based on this backdrop. I see people as individuals. I don't care if you're pink, purple, yellow, or polka dotted. Anybody ever hear that one? Okay, if that's in your vocabulary, please drop it and never use it again, okay? It's incredibly demeaning. People don't come in pinks and purples. Let's just get real. Racism's real. Let's talk about it, okay? What else do we have? Racism's in the past, race doesn't have any meaning, everyone struggles. Okay, my parents weren't racist, that's why I'm not racist, or my parents were racist, that's why I'm not racist. It doesn't really matter what comes in front, what comes behind must always be, I'm not racist. So-and-so just happened to be black. It has nothing to do with anything, although I do need to let you know that, and now I'm going to tell you about a conflict we had and insist that race had nothing to do with it. I'd actually also drop that from my vocabulary. I would drop regardless of race or just happened to be. While I might not know exactly what race had to do with that conflict or interchange, it had something to do with it, because there's no way you can take that out any more than you can take gender and how it's operating cross relationships. Okay, now, oh, I got to do this one. I was in the military. I have actually gone back and forth with white people who insist that the reason they're not racist is because they were in the military. And while I might give them, all right, you're all wearing green. That's usually what they say. We're all wearing green. It's like, I'll give you that. But first of all, who gets recruited into the military? What kind of strategies are used? I would also say, who are you killing? And how are you being trained to kill them? Right? All right. Now, if we're sophisticated, we might not say those things, but I'll get us to. So what do we say? We say stuff like, I work in a very diverse environment. I have people of color in my family. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, have any of you, this one's popular in Seattle. I live in the most diverse zip code in the United States, 98118, which is, by the way, is Columbia City and is no longer the most diverse zip code in Seattle. But let's start with those first two. How many of you, in a conversation with a white person about racism, have heard some version of, I know people of color, I have people of color in my family? Okay, right. So when a white person tells you that, they're giving you evidence, right? They're giving you their evidence for what? In their mind, what are they giving you their evidence of? That they're not racist, right? So if that is my evidence, how do I define racism? So this is actually really, this has been really useful for me to kind of go under the surface and think, okay, so then, and then if I could figure out how they're defining racism, then I can speak to it, okay? So I would say they're defining racism as conscious dislike. A racist doesn't like people of color, therefore they, I guess, couldn't work 3 cubicles down from somebody. Or if they have a person of color in their family, and clearly they have love for this person, they also couldn't possibly be racist. So they're defining it as conscious dislike, and they're not understanding the power of implicit bias. If we really, have you ever had somebody say, I used to live in New York, and that's why I'm not racist? I've actually heard all of these things, right? So I guess a racist couldn't walk by people of color without losing their shit, basically. And see, I can walk by them, and they're around me. I work here, right? Therefore, I couldn't possibly. Let me ask you, how many of you are in a cisgender? Do you know what I mean when I say cisgender? Okay, if you don't, I'll let your professors help you with that. Not transgender, okay? So you're in an opposite sex relationship. How many of you are in an opposite sex relationship? All right. So for the women in the room, you were the man, right? You got a man in your life. And the moment he fell in love with you, all his sexism disappeared, right? No? How could he have any sexism? He loves you. There's no gender dynamics in the relationship. Okay, so we see the ludicrousness of that, but we think that racism disappears. There's no racial dynamics between people if they're in an intimate relationship. All right. I used to live in New York. My children are so much open. The problem with this one is we like to romanticize children, but by age 3 or 4, all children know the racial order. This is well researched. They know the racial order. What's the racial order? It's better to be white.
So welcome back to the channel. So I'm going to talk about colorblind ideology and psychological defense mechanism as one of the ways that, the white folks keeping systems, they keep system on running, right? So some adopt a colorblind approach, believing that ignoring race will eliminate racism. This perspective can lead to denial of racial issues and sense of exemption, as these individuals may not see themselves as part of the problem. And this is true because when you teach a child not to see color, people should see color because people see color behind the closed doors. People see colors, and this is what leaked videos that we've had from the white families. It really shows a lot that while people are saying outside that, oh, we need to be in a colorblind society, while in the darkness, it is never the same. Now you realize that ignoring that some things are happening to the black people because you're not taught to see color, that's the narrative, right? But silently, racism is still going and color is still an issue, right? So you're taught to assume that living in a colorblind society will eliminate racism. Well, that doesn't do that racism, whereas it perpetuates racism, but internally, not externally, you know. So we have those things that perpetuate racism internally, just like the professors just said. We have those things that perpetuate racism internally, and we have those things that perpetuate racism externally, just like the professor said. So having to coming to see this in the sense that things are running underwater, but upfront you're being told that no, everything is okay, and you know, but it is just like an atomic bomb. I mean, it keeps on, its power, it's down below. Whereas upward, you might see something like something which is superficial. That's what's really going on with the colorblind ideology. And I'm also going to talk about psychological defense mechanism in the same line. Now you get to realize that facing realities of racial inequalities can be uncomfortable. And I know this is something which has happened to white professors who are always coming out and talking about racism things, especially when they have the white audience. And I know it's true. And if you want to know that this is true, it is uncomfortable for them, you're going to check some comments of people in towards this video. It's going to just show you that it's really uncomfortable to them, because they're going to be reflective of what they really believe, that this is really uncomfortable to them. So facing the realities of racial inequality can be uncomfortable. Some white people may experience guilt, shame, or fear when confronted with these issues, and it is true. As a defense mechanism, they may downplay or distance themselves from racial discussion to avoid these feelings, and it is true. Am I lying? It is true. Some will feel discomfort. They'll be uncomfortable, and they'll feel like, no, I don't want to do this, and they don't want to talk about this. And in the same structure, they'll come up with this colorblind society that, we have nothing to do with racism. You know, I don't see color. I love black people. I love black friends. I know they've been saying this, right? But you know, in as much as you're saying this, that you have black friends, yeah, you have people, we talk to black people a lot. I mean, that's cool. That's great, right? But you need to see this. While you are saying that, the people that you say that you're talking to, the people that you're saying that you interact to, the system is always going against them. So you get to realize where these people are coming from is not the same as where you're coming from. So just saying that you talk to black people, you have no problem, you have friends with black folks, that's a defense mechanism, especially when you know that the system is always against the black people. So they really need to, we need to check on these. And this, I'm calling out white people. It doesn't just end by talking to black people. It doesn't just end by being friends to white people. It also starts by understanding. It also starts by also advocating for equality, for lobbying for the removal of these systems that favors a group of people and that doesn't also favor another group of people. So I believe that it really starts from that point. And if we say things at that point, and I believe that this is going to be an important session And it is not just about the professor talking to you. It's about what are you going to do after listening to the lecture, you know. So I believe that these discussions are one of the things that we always need to talk about as people, generally human beings, you know. So let's continue watching the video. And I'm sorry for interruption because I have to do this, right? So let's continue.
They know that. And you got, if you are a parent of color, you got to work very hard to instill worth and pride in them in the face of that relentless message. Okay? We don't like how white our neighborhood is, but we had to move here for the schools. This is actually, I think, another really disingenuous. I think white people do like how white their neighborhoods are. Okay. So we have to go under the surface and figure out what is propping this up if we want to address it. And I think, let's look at these questions. How racially diverse was your neighborhood growing up? And what messages did you get about race from your neighborhoods? The overall pattern across the United States is that if you are white, you most likely grew up in a white neighborhood. I'm going to put it this way. You probably grew up in segregation. If you are white and you did not grow up in racial segregation, you are probably urban and poor or working class. And you probably don't still live in those neighborhoods because upward mobility takes us away. And we don't tend to maintain those relationships, okay? So the vast majority of white people grow up in segregation. And just because of time, I will let you think about what messages are we getting about race in segregation, right? We can say everybody's equal, but the practice of our lives is phenomenally more powerful than whatever we say, right? Here's another question. When's the first time you had a teacher of the same race or races if you're multiracial as you, and how often did that happen? And when's the first time you had a teacher of a different race, and how often did that happen? And the vast majority pattern across the US is if you're white from the time you began, and you can get through graduate school without having a teacher of color. So put another way, if you're white, from the time you begin, you are relentlessly reflected in your teachers and then, of course, your textbooks and everything else. If you're a person of color and you're, with a rare exception for blacks in, say, Atlanta and certain parts of DC, then the answer to this question is rarely, if ever, did I look up and see myself reflected in that person. Now, the teaching force is upwards of 93% white. It is getting whiter, not less white. And those teachers answer these questions in the same way. Grow up in segregation, rarely if ever have a teacher of color. So where do we get our information then about people of color? Well, really problematic sources, right? Media, TV, jokes, admissions, warnings, right? Where do I get my, I watch MSNBC Lockdown. I watch Cops. I watch Jerry Springer, right? So picture, those are my sources, and now I'm going to go and socialize everybody's children. And I'm going to decide who's smart and respectful and well-behaved and who deserves to be punished in what way and who deserves to go to special ed, et cetera, right? And we have the school-to-prison pipeline, which, again, it's not about individual teachers' intentions. It's about a very deep socialization that we cannot admit to and that comes out in our assessments. So I'm going to show you my image. I like to use images for this dynamic of the teaching force. So this is the College Jeopardy Champion Playoffs. These are our best and our brightest, certified as highly educated by our universities. And this is the board at the end of their grand champion round. And as we can see, there's a category not one of them touched. So it was probably the hardest, I would assume, and they didn't want to lose. And for me, it would be astrophysics or chemistry or something. All right, well, let's just see. And I don't know that I can express what this means in terms of the ability for white supremacy to continue. And when I say white supremacy, I mean whites as central and superior. If you disconnect us from our history and we do not know our history, we cannot challenge racism. This is a crisis. Our schools are getting more segregated. Our teaching force is getting whiter, okay? All right, so Joe Fegan is a sociologist that has this concept of the white racial frame. You can think of it as those pillars. It's the framework through which whites make racial meaning, and that it functions to position whites as superior, and it's passed down and reinforced across the society. So I'm going to start showing you some images. I think that's a great example of the white racial frame. Right? Ideal beauty for the world, right? You don't have to read Vogue magazine for this to affect you. This affects all of us. Anyone who tells me that advertising doesn't affect them is telling me they don't understand socialization. Not to mention the multi-billion-dollar advertising industry. Here's an ad I got on a Delta Airlines flight last year. My initial response to it was, oh my God, it's just, there's the racial hierarchy right there. So you have your white women in the front with red hair wearing green. You have Asian women in the middle wearing yellow. And you have black women in the back wearing brown. Okay, so right there you've got your racial hierarchy. But look at the ad is for a purse. So look at the 3 sets of women's hands. The black women don't even have the purse. Right, just this kind of, again, in just an instant, right, we're absorbing. This one, maximize the performance of your employees. This 6 shirtless black men knelt at the foot of this white man. And look at the body language, right? We're absorbing this. Nothing I'm showing you stands alone. We can read it precisely because it connects to the millions of other images that circulate around us. You know when you're reading CNN or Huffington Post or something and there's these constant flashes to, go to this story, right? And I saw one that said, the most beautiful women in the world, right? So, okay, I got to check this out. Representing South Africa, by the way, which is 92% black, South Africa is, 8% white. That to me is white supremacy. There was not one Asian woman. Asian women are the majority of women in the world. And in this most beautiful women in the world, no Asian women. So I think the most powerful adaptation of racism over time is this good-bad binary. You make racism so bad that white people cannot tolerate looking at it in themselves. And it's the root of virtually all defensiveness you've ever gotten from a white person trying to talk about racism. So let's fill it in. A racist is ignorant and bigoted and prejudiced and mean-spirited and old and southern. Well, drives a pickup truck, we'll get some classism in there. Not racist is progressive and educated and northern, open-minded, etc., right? So keep noticing how powerful this is in the dominant narrative about what it means to be complicit with this system and how fantastically it functions to make it hard to talk about, okay? So I'm going to use the example of my life to talk about what it means to be white. So the first thing is that I was born into a society in which I belong. Okay? I belong at that faculty meeting, I belong at that church service, I belong at that block party, dealing with my daughter's teachers, her camp counselors, that wedding, right? Day in and day out. And I do not ever take for granted the power of belonging. It's in my bones, it's in my muscles, right? Any space deemed neutral or normal, I belong as a white person. It's a fantastic psychic freedom. And nothing I'm about to say can be said by a person of color in this society. Okay? Represented in the government, so let's look at that. Right? I don't know that there's a more powerful image than God, right? And here's what I saw as a child looking up. There's God creating man. There's Jesus, who, by the way, was a man of color. And Moses and Mary. Whites are the norm for humanity. I was trying to think of how to represent this. So you've all seen those things? Okay, here's a close-up. Even with their skin off, they're white. Here's Adam and Eve, the first human beings. Constant messages that it's better to be white. I'm just going to say this again. Nobody misses the message it's better to be white. I don't, on a conscious level, believe or want that message. It comes at me 24/7. Right? Here's best hair. We have Halle Berry here, but of course her hair is straightened. This little girl has been dubbed the most beautiful girl in the world. I have a problem with that on many levels, but in terms of white supremacy, this is on a science website right now. What would a scientifically perfect face look like? Contrasted with what I'm going to show you next, which ran in Psychology Today in 2011. This comes through in dating practices, in pornography, in everybody is affected by these messages, right? I was racially affirmed throughout my childhood, and I'm going to use images from today's childhood. I want you to get the water, okay? This has been exported worldwide. I've seen so many little girls of color with these backpacks, just, again, that relentless image of whiteness as ideal. This is Ayala Jackson. She's a little girl that was killed in a police shootout in her home in Detroit. But what's so particularly poignant about that picture is she posed in front of those Disney princesses. We'll get the boys in here because childhood is so gendered. This is the Academy Board of Governors who decide the Oscars. These are who write our stories. These are who shape all of our understandings and their depiction of the other, right? Let's just leave it at this photo, okay? I have a whole chapter on this movie. If you are white and you love a movie about race, that should be a red flag. Because it probably reinforced a really cherished narrative, which is usually there's good whites and there's bad whites, and we're the good whites. And I would get rid of that. That's rooted in the good bad. This reminded me an awful lot of that. And of course, these are the images. You know, here's his community. And then here is, you know, he was saved by his white family. Can you even see the brown girls in this? There's one on each end, as usually that's what you get. You're going to get one on each end or one to the side. When you do get Latina, here in this one Latina, devious maids. Let's just do Lord of the Rings. I'm going to go fast. Okay, 100%. Every creature in Lord of the Rings is white. They're literally trying to get to the White City. They're trying to escape the Dark Lord of Mordor. Here's our hero. And then these are the monsters. It's relentless. Okay, I'm going to end this piece by looking at these TV shows that many of us grew up with. They span the decades. We've got Seinfeld in the 80s, Sex and the City 90s, Friends in the 2000s. We've exported these worldwide. Every one of these shows is about ideal friendship, and every one of these shows takes place in New York City. Arguably the most racially diverse city in the US. The message, over and over. These two proud people made an app that's been very successful. It's called the Sketch Factor. When you go to a new city, the app will tell you what neighborhoods to avoid, and I bet you there'd be a lot of the neighborhoods that you all come from, right? So I'm going to end by saying the most powerful way my life has been shaped by my race, or what it means to be white, is that I could be born into, I could learn, I could play, I could worship, I could study, I could love, I could work, and I could die in segregation. And not one person who's ever loved me or guided me has ever conveyed loss. And the message of segregation, the good schools and good neighborhoods we love so much, is that there is no inherent value in the perspectives and experiences of people of color. And then you get to this point in life, and now I'm a professor, I'm going to have a hard time even noticing they're missing, much less being able to take in their value. This is how white supremacy is circulating. And so under the surface, we have the good-bad binary, individualism, universalism, internalized superiority, an investment in the racial order, and segregation. These are the linchpins of white supremacy or racism today that allows us to live so unequal by race and profess that it has no impact or meaning for us. Okay. So I'm going to end with just putting these up here, and I feel the need to say, it should be clear that I am a pretty empowered person, right? I'm not coming across to you as a guilt-ridden person. This is not about being bad, but it's about waking up and seeing the water, because I think the most toxic and hostile condition for people of color every day is unexamined whiteness. This socialization comes out of my pores. And keep noticing, this is my socialization, but I'm objective. You play the race card. I get to decide whether your claims of racism are legitimate or not from this background, from this deep investment in a system that serves me, but never being able to admit that to myself, right? This is the level that we have to start to change those pillars and within ourselves and in our relationships if we're going to move forward. So I thank you very much for your attention.
So guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm going to talk about the two things, and the first one is lack of personal experience. Yeah, I know. You know, white people may not or are not experiencing racism just like black people or any other group of marginalized people. So white people may not experience racial discrimination in the same way that white people do. And it is easy to dismiss or underestimate its impact without first-hand experience. And it may be difficult for some to fully grasp the significance of racial issues because they have not experienced this firsthand. And with this type of problem, and this is inevitable because you haven't experienced this firsthand, so you cannot advocate, you cannot talk because you're not feeling it. But it takes a person with compassion, and I'm not looking for sympathy from white people, right? But I'm just trying to mention what is right or what should be done or what keeps on happening. So you really don't have to wait to be a personal experience. You really don't have to wait for your brother, for your black brother or for your black sister to undergo through racism, and while you are with them watching them, or you don't have to wait to marry a black woman so for you to start advocating for them. It starts, from where you are. It starts from you seeing it as a human being. So this is a call for people to not wait for a personal experience for us to come and talk about racism, to come and talk about the problems which are happening to the black people. So this is a call. This is a call, and I hope that every person, every black person, every white person who watched this video until this point can advocate for. Remember, as I said, remaining silent in a situation of injustice is a complacent injustice. So I believe that it is important for you to advocate for your brothers, to stand up for them. And when you see black people cutting the placards on the street, also carry the placards on the street, because today it's them, tomorrow it's you. You never know. The system doesn't really care. It might care for you today, but tomorrow things might change. So advocate, 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 because I believe that it's an important discussion that we always need to have, and we always need to talk about it, because it is important for the coming generation, for my generation, and for the coming generation, and for the generations which have always been there and which are still there. You see, experiencing something firsthand is really important. I don't dispute the fact that, but all I'm saying is that we don't have to wait for it to happen for you to, marry a black man or get married to a black woman, for you to understand the problems that they are facing. Just look at these at a stance of a human being. Just look at these as a stance that you're trying to protect people who you really care of, So I understand that lack of personal experience, which is being perpetuated by being not taught about race and being taught to believe that there's nothing like there's nothing like black or white, there's nothing like colorblind issue, So I understand the plight of people who have also advocated for this. We have individuals who have advocated for understanding why some white people might feel exempted from racial conditioning, So we have people like Peggy McIntosh, and he talked about white privilege. So his insight was that McIntosh is one of the most cited scholars on white privilege. Our work discusses how white people often see themselves as just as people, unaware of the benefits they receive due to their skin color. Metaphorically, describes white privileges as invisible knapsack of earned advantages. This awareness contributes to a sense of exemption from racial conditions because the privilege is often invisible to those who benefit from it. If you may want to check this document out, documented work, this article is a cornerstone in discussion about race and privileges, highlighting how white individuals can improve through life without being affected by race in that way people of color are, And amongst people who have also talked about this, the lady who is the professor who's also presenting, she has also done a book called White Fragility. If you haven't checked out the video, I also talked about it. If you haven't checked out the book, you can also go check out the book if you want to learn deeply about racial issues. Just as a suggestion to you, I'm doing a suggestion to you if you're a person who's interested in understanding racial to you, because I'm a student in African American sociology. So these are one of the things, or these are one of the works that we usually explore in our classes. I'm also going to recommend you a person called Eduardo Bonilla Silva, and he talks about colorblind racism. He talks about racism without racists, colorblind racism, and the persistence of racial inequality in America. That's the year 2003. He wrote about it. What's the insight in his book? I'm going to give you a short insight of what is in his book. So Eduardo Bonilla Silva argues that adoption of colorblind ideology by white people allows them to ignore the racial disparities as they claim not to see race. This ideology supports the idea that racial inequalities are the things of the past, which can lead to a belief that racial conditions do not affect them. This mentality reinforces the notion that race is not relevant for people of color, not for themselves, right? Amongst other things that I've talked about, you get to realize that we have some scholars that have talked about it. And one of the most known scholars that have also talked about this is James Baldwin. And he talked about the illusion of innocence. If you haven't also checked that, I'll recommend you to go also check that. And I'm just going to give you a sneak preview of what he says about the illusion of innocence. James Baldwin, a prominent African-American writer and activist, often critiqued white Americans' reluctance to confront its own racial bias. He argued that white people maintain an illusion of innocence regarding racial matters, which allows them to deny responsibility for racial inequalities. This denial is a form of psychological escape, making them feel exempted from racial conditions, which is really important, amongst other things that I've also talked about during the presentation that I've given in regards to this. I'm also going to recommend you to go check Charles W. Mills and the Racial Contract. It is important, really, really important. This is a book which was written, an article which was also written in 1997. The philosopher Charles W. Mills discusses the racial contract, an unspoken agreement among white people to maintain and benefit from racial hierarchies. This contract is ingrained in society that many white people are unaware of its existence, leading them to feel exempted from racial considerations. Mills argued that the exemption is a deliberate ignorance. The exemption is a deliberate ignorance. And I know that some folks will come to the comment section and still talk about this and still try to piss me off, but I'm gonna keep my cool. I'm not gonna reply to them because I know that people like them still exist. So Mill argues that the exemption is a deliberate ignorance that allows the racial status quo to persist. And as I said, remember when I said that while they keep assuming that these things doesn't exist, deep down in the undersea, they are still continuing. They're still continuing and they are still happening, right? So most known, one of the most known when it comes to these talks, I'm going to talk about Tim Wise. I know you know Tim Wise. Tim Wise has been advocating for the black inequality. He has talked about black people and he has confronted white people. I mean, he has confronted his own race and matters to do with race and how the systemic racism has always been continuing, you know. So he's an anti-racism educator. Tim Wise discusses how many white people deny the existence of racial privilege and inequality. He argues that this denial is a form of cognitive dissonance where acknowledging racial privileges will require confronting uncomfortable truths about societies and about oneself, you know. So this denial creates a psychological barrier leading to white privilege to being feel exempted. So they don't want to talk about this because what is called cognitive dissonance. You check out one of my videos. I've also talked about how white people are going through what is called the cognitive dissonance. So I really hope that we really get to learn about all this. And as a person, as a black person, I'm suggesting you this so that you go check out this, really go learn and, you know, just see for yourself how things really go. So I'm also going to recommend to you a person called, a scholar called Michael Kimmel. He talked about privilege unchecked. Probably, I know people will like reading or people have watched his videos, I've learned from him. So he's a sociologist. And as I told you, these are one of the texts that we usually look into in our classrooms. So sociologist Michael Kimmel examines how white men in particular may feel entitled to their positions of privilege and become defensive when its privilege is challenged. Kimmel argues that many white men feel exempt from discussions of race because they perceive themselves as being under threat from social changes that challenge their dominance. So guys, this is your presenter Eugene Talking Stories, and I hope that you are always learning from my videos. And if you're watching this video for the first time, I'll deep down ask you to subscribe to the channel, to join my membership and really get to see beautiful things that I can offer you in my channel. As you know, this is your presenter Eugene Talking Stories, and until then, let's meet in my next video, which is also going to be educational. Until then, peace, love and harmony. Salute.